All right, welcome. Thanks for joining us for this webinar. We're going to be talking about Convergent Research's very first call for UK-based focused research organizations. So I'm Mary. I'm the head of strategic initiatives at Convergent Research. We're a US-based nonprofit science studio that launches moonshot science projects. And I'm here today with my colleagues, Adam Marblestone, who's the CEO and co-founder of Convergent Research, and Janelle Tam, who is our head of programs. We are very excited to introduce this pilot program to you. It's our first foray into the UK, and it's powered by ARIA, which is the UK's Advanced Research and Invention Agency. Okay, so today we will tell you all about FROs, our call for UK proposals, and the FRO founder residency. We're planning on leaving plenty of time at the end to answer questions. Since we have a lot of people on the call, it would be great if you can mute yourselves during the presentations and type your questions into the chat. And then if you have additional questions after the webinar, you can email frost@convergentresearch.org. And then now I will turn it over to Adam to introduce the FRO model and Convergent Research.
Well, thank you, Mary, and thanks everyone for coming. We're quite excited about this. So just to give you a bit of background on what are we trying to do, why are we here? Convergent Research, we are inspired by the types of projects that are shown on this slide, which they're related to science, but they're not exactly what you would call scientific discoveries. They're more like big engineering in service of science. The key bottleneck to making projects like this happen is some combination of funding and human coordination to make something like the Hubble Space Telescope or the Large Hadron Collider. If you can get them built, then they lift the boats of a very broad field or area or multiple fields of science. They're also, they're not traditional businesses either, right? So the Hubble Space Telescope doesn't make money, but it needs a very professionalized, very structured, industrial-like effort to actually construct it. And so our question that motivates this focused research organization model is really like, why aren't there more of these sort of big engineering and service of science or team coordination based coordinated research programs being developed? And I think a key observation about this is that these don't all have to be, multi-billion-dollar, multi-decadal, international mega projects, right? These can just be potentially, 15 to 30 people, let's say, for a 4 or 5 year period. There may be fields where our current structures don't actually create a natural way to align incentives and organize these kind of mid-scale teams around focused projects to build tools, systems, data sets, or so on, that would massively accelerate some field of science. So if we can, even at a much smaller scale than something like the Human Genome Project, make a space for these team-driven, systems engineering-driven projects that wouldn't get done either in a traditional academic environment or in an industry environment, we can potentially have a big impact on science. So that's what leads to the focused research organization model. This is a kind of template that both funders, as well as scientists, researchers, engineers can use to kind of create the discourse around what are the need for these projects, what are the bottlenecks that they would solve. And so the focused research organization, it aims to combine, you could say it aims to combine some of the best elements of other existing institutional structures. It also aims to fill a gap. So in this Venn diagram, on the sort of lower left are projects that are institutional structures that are sort of well optimized for creating, you could call it public goods or fundamental science or research. Academia is maybe the largest of those. On the lower right, canonically organizations that are sort of able to do very tightly coordinated focused teamwork, right? So a startup is just trying to build one product, right, and get it out there very quickly with a very small and kind of laser focused team. And then on the top, it's kind of things that can get to a reasonable level of scale. So industry, big corporate research labs can canonically get to a kind of larger level of scale. But what if you want, a decent amount of scale, a very high level of focus, and you're doing that in service of public goods creation or fundamental science? That's still something that's hard to do. And so that's the gap that the focused research organization tries to fill. And so this has a few elements. Rather than saying our goal is to make as much money as possible or generate as much returns for investors as possible, what the FRO is doing, each FRO is basically trying to solve some sort of major capability gap or bottleneck within science. So these are usually saying we want to make such process or new process that's 100 times cheaper, 100 times better, 100 times faster, et cetera, within a finite period of time. These are meant to be not just incremental projects. They're meant to be not just sort of totally straightforward build out. There can be a significant research aspect. Something like this has never been built before, but you're still building a very concrete thing, tangible public goods products of some kind. And the organizational model, I would say, is inspired by many aspects of what we see with deep tech startups, but not completely identical to that. And so one of the key aspects of it is that, rather than a model where this is just a grant and it's kind of one of many projects that, let's say, an academic lab is pursuing with different trainees kind of pursuing different projects, it's a full-time leadership role, similar to being a startup founder. You have a full-time kind of well-rounded founding team that then goes and, they can collaborate with other institutions, they can collaborate with universities, they can have subcontracts and partnerships and everything. So it doesn't have to be fully internal, but the dominant model is that you're a full-time leadership team similar to a startup founding team that then hires a set of professionals for a set of well-defined roles that are needed to actually go and build both kind of technically and operationally the organization that can then build these tools, systems, data sets, et cetera, that the FRO is producing. And they're trying to emphasize the kind of fast execution. So we're not giving a permanent endowment for open-ended research. We're saying, here's funding to build this thing, and then you have to build it, and you have to then figure out and decide what's next, where to take it, which could be done in a variety of ways. But you have a pressure, to execute quickly and build something concrete. So in the US, we've launched several of these that are up and running. You can check out their website. Across a variety of fields. We started in biology and neuroscience, but this is now extended also into software for formal math and also into infrastructure for modeling ocean-based carbon removal. And it's starting to extend to many fields kind of beyond platform technologies or data sets for biology, which is where we began several years ago. I think something that's important to mention about this call that we're doing and our partnership with ARIA and just our general philosophy is that we want these things to be really ambitious. They're, whereas in a for-profit market or in a more small scale exploratory research, there can be many, many, many projects, thousands of startups and so on. There's going to be a smaller number of focused research organizations, right? This is a unique opportunity. And so we want to target these to the most impactful problems. And so we have some, you can think about that in a variety of ways. I think it sort of defies the traditional dichotomy of pure versus applied research, some of what we're trying to do. But the idea is that just with this finite action, maybe what a 20-person team does over 3 to 5 years, let's say, that could unlock progress in an entire field that really is multiplicative on work that might be done by thousands of other researchers, engineers, et cetera. So let's think a little bit about how we think about these important problems. What are fundamental problems that might be FRO shaped? Well, you can sort of think about this from the perspective of a technology tree, right? Going back to ancient times, we've made a whole series of technologies and scientific discoveries that then build on each other and enable other ones. A vaccine for COVID builds on mRNA vaccines, which builds on the ability to do RNA synthesis, which builds on organic chemistry, which builds on physics, and so on. So in some sense, closer to the trunk of the more we can be close to the trunk of the technology tree, there's a certain perspective in which you can have the most impact from this type of science acceleration project. So just to give you an example, if we think about many areas, many applied areas of impact, neurodegenerative diseases, psychiatric diseases, new types of AI, understanding consciousness. All of those depend on neuroscience, which depends on having maps of the brain. Now, maps of the brain right now are very expensive and difficult to get at any reasonable resolution. And so having a technology, a platform technology that can make faster, cheaper, better the process of brain circuit mapping is powerful. But do we have a concrete way of making a faster, cheaper, better brain circuit mapping technology? It turns out that we can identify what is the problem within brain circuit mapping that's making it expensive, and then we can combine a series of technologies to actually create a solution. For solving that problem, they have a well-defined roadmap for how to do that in 5 years. That's not going to say they're going to map the entire mouse brain in 5 years. They're going to build this technology and unblock this bottleneck, if you will, whereby the circuit mapping technology can now be cheap and fast. And therefore, we can catalytically unlock all these benefits. So those are typically the types of projects we're looking for, but frankly, we're very open to your interpretation of what is most important at this sort of early stage of applications. And of course, what we want to do in our partnership with ARIA is to have these types of catalytic unlocks, but relative to the opportunity spaces that they have identified and where they're starting to build programs in certain areas. We believe that these types of tool systems, data sets, capabilities can unlock more impact from their opportunity spaces. So in terms of the process of FRO creation, one thing that's really also important is that we want you to be quite concrete and quite specific about what is the part that needs this new organization, this new nonprofit, let's say, or in the case of these UK, it could actually be a for-profit vehicle. We can discuss this a little bit. But what is the need for this unique organizational structure and incentive and funding that cannot be done by other scientists in the field? It's not just a matter of more money in a general area or more effort or more intelligence in a general area. What is the specific thing that needs the FRO to actually build? So we call this sort of carving out the FRO-shaped problem within a broader research agenda. Again, we're not saying we're going to solve neuroscience or solve neuropsychiatric diseases. We're saying we want to make a faster, cheaper, better brain circuit mapping technology, and this is how we do that. And this is why we need a FRO to do that. So just to kind of summarize that, we want to highly catalytic, unlocking the work of other researchers, really something that cannot be done in an academic lab. So, and this is not just for lack of money to the academic lab, but fundamentally because the incentives of an academic structure often have more to do with the creativity of individuals, right? Your PhD thesis has to be a fundamentally different PhD thesis than mine. We can't just collaborate on exactly the same, building exactly the same PhD thesis as a product, because then we're not differentiating ourselves academically. And that's a very good thing for creativity-driven research, but it means that there can be limitations on the type of teamwork that is well incentivized and the types of roles that flourish the most in academia. And that can't be done for profit. So if there was a way for you to seek out traditional investment, maybe you don't immediately have the skills to get that investment, but if you beefed up your skills and you could access those investors in the for-profit sector, if there was a way for you to do that, we want you to not be applying for that as a FRO. We want you to be instead going and applying to traditional venture capitalists, because there's just many more of them, and that's a very, very well-oiled structure. We want to reserve the FROs for things that can only be done in this way. And we want you to, and this is something that you would also be further developing over the course of the residency program, to create a very concrete roadmap for what you're building. I think there can be certainly pivoting on the way to the goal, but we want you to be able to envision what you're doing. It's not just an exploratory project, it's really an execution project ultimately when you get to the FRO, and you need to have a roadmap that you can execute against. And as we do this, we start with a kind of high level abstract, identifying the FRO shape, identifying the bottleneck, roughly what you have to do. And we will kind of work with you in the residency program if you're selected for that, to go through and further develop that proposal. And we always do some amount of scientific peer review and input from scientists on developing that into a full proposal. So I already gave you the example of E11 Bio, building a platform technology for brain circuit mapping. Just to give you an idea of some of the leaders of this project, Andrew was basically a postdoc at MIT at the time he started, coming basically from an academic background. He had a little bit of startup experience. June has a PhD in chemistry, but had spent some time in startups. And Johan, their neuroanatomy lead, had been at a nonprofit institute called HHMI Genelia, leading another project. And they have a number of advisors in academia and industry and so on. But the kind of core team builds out from Andrew and June, and then these key early employees. So this is really something that you can do. It's a lot of work and learning to develop your skills to be able to build such an organization. But we really want to take applications from a wide range of scientists who are brave enough to try to do this. But we can also help work with you on developing some of the skills that you need to do that. Forest Neurotech is just another example. They're building a implantable device that can read and write to the brain, different areas of the brain, using ultrasound on a chip based technology as a sort of hardware, software medical device element that they're making, but it's also really going to create a research tool for many researchers to understand actually what ultrasound can do in the brain. And they have key collaborations with academic neurosurgery groups and clinicians and so on in order to make this project happen. Let's keep going. So what is this ultimately? What are we ultimately going for? At the most narrow level, a FRO maybe could be defined as successful if it just achieves the roadmap that it set out. But what we really want to see is this catalytic impact. By building this thing, you unlock progress in your field overall. So that has a very key kind of social and partnership aspect, figuring out what to do with the science and kind of research artifacts that you produce that can be done in nonprofit scaling paths. You could collaborate with larger institutes. You could get more philanthropic funding. You could collaborate. You can do a kind of government-backed path where this actually leads into or enables a kind of government-backed mega project or follow-on project. You can spin out new commercial companies for this to give a wider audience or to give applications to it. You could license technology into industry. There are many possible scaling paths, but what's important to us is that the impact, vastly exceed just the discoveries that are sort of locally made within the FRO, and that they be highly catalytic. And so with that, I would like to turn it back to Mary to tell us about the FROST program.
Cool, thanks, Adam. All right, so what are we requesting in this call for proposals? So, we're really looking for ideas aligned with what Adam was describing earlier that have the potential to create new capabilities and accelerate progress in ARIA's opportunity spaces. We're looking for projects that would be overlooked or underfunded in traditional research environments. And of the founding team, we're looking for 1 or 2 team members to participate in a 6-month part-time boot camp that would start in June and run through December of this year. And so take a look at ARIA's website for the current opportunity spaces. As Adam mentioned, they're currently in the process of recruiting their second cohort of program directors, so they may be adding additional opportunity spaces. We've asked the program directors for ideas for FROs that they would be really excited to see proposals around. So you can see that in our request for FROs document that's on the website. And so here's the application process. So we're asking for concept papers by February 7th. These are optional, but this is a really good way for you to get feedback on your idea. It doesn't have to be polished. We're really looking for, what is the FRO idea? Why does it have to be an FRO? And what's the impact that it's going to have? Then the full proposals are due March 28th. You know, if you move to the next step, we'll be inviting groups to give virtual pitches in April, and then to a finalist day on May 15th, which is in person and in the UK. So at the end of May, we'll be inviting 3 to 5 founding teams to participate in our founder residency that's running in the latter half of the year. And Janelle will talk more about what the residency will entail. So to give you a sense of what we're looking for in the applications, this is actually detailed in the About FROs document on the website, but essentially we're looking for what is the vision? What's the significant bottleneck that you're looking to overcome? Why is the FRO the best mechanism for overcoming the bottleneck? What is the technology or tool or data set that your FRO will develop? We want to see a preliminary but actionable and thoughtfully scoped technical plan with, ambitious but realistic milestones. We're looking for proposers that have really deep technical expertise and that have the operational ability to recruit and lead the team that's necessary to accomplish, the tasks. And we're looking for proposers that can pitch clearly and compellingly and have a cohesive start a team. So everything you need to know is on our website, convergentresearch.org/FROST-UK. Definitely take a look at the list of essential resources for this opportunity. And we just last night added our teaming platform. So this is for people who are interested in connecting with others that are interested and maybe bringing together a team that has diverse expertise. So you can submit your profile on the website and see our database of other people that you can reach out to and connect with to work on a proposal together. Okay, so with that, I will turn it over to Janelle to talk about the residency.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. So, first of all, who is eligible for the residency? You have to be committed to leading the FRO full time. So, if selected, if it is going to launch, basically starting Q2 2026, this will be your full-time job, which is very exciting, but also requirements. For the program itself, we're asking for a commitment of 20 hours weekly for 6 months, and you will receive a stipend, so you will be compensated for your time. The reason we've built it this way is so you can continue to have your ongoing employment, given this is a 6-month program, but we do ask for enough of a time commitment for you to get the most out of it and have the opportunity to put the work into develop your FRO proposal to its fullest. You can participate virtually from anywhere, but you do have to travel to the UK for certain in-person components of the residency. Generally, this means we have a kickoff retreat at the beginning, we have a demo day at the end, and in the middle, we ask you to convene a workshop of experts to talk about your proposal. So expect like at least 3+ travel events. And then you can be affiliated with an existing organization, but the FRO itself actually has to be its own independent entity with its full-time dedicated team. And so part of the work you're going to be doing is figuring out who this team is, like what this team looks like, how to hire for it, and beginning to figure out how you would build it out. So what does the program itself entail? Can you go to the next slide, Mary? So it's the reason we developed the residency is we wanted to give you the opportunity to do 2 things. First of all, to take an idea and turn it into a really high quality FRO proposal with lots of guidance from Convergent on kind of what feedback from Convergent, from Adam, from Mary, but also from external experts, from folks that do peer review, to really just refine the idea and turn it into a reality. And so pieces of this are the road mapping workshop we talked about, right? Where you make a list of like, whose input would I love to have from on this idea, and then you convene them for a workshop and you talk to them about it. And then a second piece is like scientific review, right? So like generally speaking, what does this community think of this? It's not like a go, no go, but it is like, hey, let's get some useful feedback to further refine this idea. The second thing this is a chance to develop the skills and network to make it a reality. So I'm not sure what a lot of your backgrounds are, but generally, you know, there's some background in science and academia. What we're asking you to do is become a founder of an organization. And that is a big shift. And so part of the goal of this program is to equip you with the skills and network to make that shift from, oh, I'm a scientist working in a lab, or I had this idea, to like, I'm a founder creating this organization with this goal that I want to accomplish. And that generally includes 4 to 5 hours of programming, plus, you know, again, like we said, travel to pitch day, travel to the kickoff retreat. And then we'll have a weekly cadence of one-on-one mentorship sessions and workshops. We're going to go through and kind of teach you those skills week by week. Next slide, please, Mary. And so what we give you in return is, first of all, funding. So for the duration of the residency, you'll be paid for your time. That's a stipend of £20,000 and travel expenses for 2 individuals per founding team. We also provide mentorship, right? So we'll have a mentored advisor who sort of functions as like a partner and an accelerator. And we'll also bring in external experts, experienced founders. And then there's the entire Convergent team itself, which has operational, legal, and financial experts who have actually, helped to launch 8 FROs to date. And so they'll take that knowledge and teach it to you. And finally, network, right? So you'll have a cohort of other folks that are incubating FRO ideas. There's a wider Convergent community, the existing FRO founders and employees, and then the funders that will be at pitch day. And so the whole idea of this residency is a dedicated period of time for you to flesh out this idea, turn it into a proposal, and gather everything that you need to potentially make it a reality. All right, I'll pass it over to Mary to talk about beyond the residency.
Cool, thanks, Janelle. Okay, so a little bit right after the residency period, the participants will present at a demo day or a pitch day for funding, and our goal is to select 1 or 2 FROs to fund with budgets of 10 to 14 million pounds over 3 to 5 years. If your idea needs more funding, you are responsible for additional fundraising. You should have a well thought out plan. But the intention is for the 10 to 14 million pounds to get you to a significant inflection point in developing your tool or data set or technology. So if your FROs is selected for funding, you would be expected to establish it as an independent UK entity in early 2026. In terms of legal structure, we're flexible to nonprofit or for-profit, or can have elements of both, with a governance board. These are all things that you can determine during the residency and will be part of, some of the workshops that Janelle mentioned. Your UK FRO would receive a grant or a contract from Convergent UK, detailing, milestone-based funding, certain things around intellectual property, right? So the intention is for the technology developed by the FROs to be available for non-commercial uses, like research and education. Convergent would expect to have a license to the technology, and in the event that the FRO ceases to operate, we would have a right to distribute the technology consistent with our mission of impact. And then, finally, there'd be things around compliance. So of course, your entity would have to comply with the relevant UK laws. I think one thing that Adam touched on, right, is that what's important is that the FRO is creating tools that will have a significant impact on science and society. And so to achieve this, it's not simply enough to build something. We are expecting proposers to be thoughtful about how the technology is put out in the world, how you'd be engaging the research community. So these are just examples of right, things that you would be doing beyond just putting out publications, collaborations, organizing, right, conferences, hosting interns, open sourcing some aspects of the technology, or even distributing tools or reagents to the community. And then beyond the FRO, we view the FRO as a sprint period, but the work doesn't just simply end when the initial catalytic funding is spent. So the things that you develop within your FRO will need a thoughtful transition plan to maximize their impact. And this could look, this could be sort of a variety of different things. These are just some examples of the nonprofit and commercial transition pathways that you could consider, right? So you could develop a sustainable business model, either nonprofit or commercial, to continue funding work related to what you've already developed. You could join an existing organization through a partnership or an acquisition, or you could open source the assets or transfer them to another nonprofit or license them to new startups and spin-outs or companies. And so finally, I just wanted to summarize, why should you consider being a FRO founder? So Janelle mentioned, right, you're going to be learning a lot of things. You'll also just get deep leadership and entrepreneurial skills from launching and running, a startup-like entity. You'll be building out your network. You'll have access to a significant amount of non-dilutive capital to build a catalytic science and technology capability, as well as, right, all of these sort of downstream opportunities that could be commercial or non-commercial. And then I think for the next stage, we're happy to answer any questions that you drop into the chat.
Yeah, so a question was about whether only UK organizations are eligible.
Yeah, so the expectation is that if your FRO idea is funded, it would be started as a UK entity.
And another question around if it's already a for-profit entity, if they might be eligible to become a FRO.
I think we're open to considering it. It really depends on how aligned the FRO idea is with the existing entity. I think, Janelle mentioned what we're concerned about is that the FRO has a full-time independent team that's dedicated to working on it. But we're
Okay.
open to considering and discussing.
Yeah. Can you submit more than one concept paper for the preliminary call?
Yes.
Is the IP going to be owned by the there's a question around IP ownership. Will it belong to the company that is the result of a FRO?
Yes, yeah. So you would set up your FRO as, whatever entity it is or whatever legal structure, and the IP would reside within that entity.
But I think that actually Convergent has ownership of that IP.
That's for the US portfolio.
Oh, that's for the
Let
US.
me explain a little bit about
try
the
that.
IP. So with the US FROs, the IP is actually held by the FRO, but the FROs are set up as subsidiaries of a Convergent nonprofit, and so there's sort of a slight technicality on this. I would say the IP will be held by the FRO. You should think of it as the FRO is getting, depending on the type of entity that it is, a grant or contract. It's its own entity, is getting a grant or contract from Convergent UK. That grant or contract will have certain requirements on the entity that receives it. And one of those requirements is that basically for nonprofit research purposes, kind of non-commercial research purposes, including academic research, that IP be made like broadly accessible to the public. So it's not going to work to just to basically to think of this as a way of funding a company that keeps everything secret and doesn't let the research community use it. However, for the FRO, for example, generally speaking, would be free to license for certain commercial purposes, to a spin-off entity or for itself, to pursue commercial applications. So it's a question of the grant terms and making sure that it's accessible to the research community. Now, if something happens, like the FRO disappears, and or it fails to make it accessible to the research community, then that grant agreement will also have some sort of step-in provision that allows Convergent to say, okay, well, actually, we can make this accessible to universities and so on for research, if the FRO is unable to do that.
Relatedly, what is the ownership structure of the FRO?
It'll be set up as its own independent entity.
Okay, cool. How do you make a distinction between for-profit, which is apparently eligible and potentially, sorry, I don't understand that question. Maybe clarify that, Kevin. Does the founding team need to be solidified at the time of the concept paper?
No, it does not have to be. And I think during the residency, there'll be opportunity to, right, sort of like flesh out who you need for your founding team and who you might want to bring on. I think that successful applicants will likely be, maybe one or two founders that are already working together pretty cohesively and have complementary skills. Adam, Janelle, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think we want, I think ideally the person submitting the concept paper is, and the person who would participate in the residency, that's at least a sort of a nucleus of the founding team. We want that person to be ready to drive the process and build out other co-founders around you and so on. But I think part of the purpose of the residency is to potentially solidify who makes sense to be on the founding team. How do you work with those people? What is exactly the exact right shape of the founding team beyond the resident who is applying?
Yeah. So we have the teaming platform in case you want to start thinking about your team. We found team is often, it is the foundation of the organization. And so it's important to start thinking about that as early as possible. That being said, it takes time to find the right team members and co-founders. And so part of the residency itself is actually going to be giving you the opportunity to think through that. So I'd say, whether you're solo, you maybe have a team, I would suggest applying and submitting a concept paper regardless, because that's how you can get feedback generally on, oh, is this eligible? Is this at the right, just submit a concept paper and that will give us the information we need to provide you with a good response. But the team does not have to be fully formed. That's something that we work with you on. Okay, some great questions. How are applications assessed and who makes the go, no-go decisions for ARIA or CR?
Yeah, so they'll be reviewed by a combination of ARIA, the relevant ARIA program directors and Convergent Research. We may get input from some external experts as well. The evaluation criteria, we've actually shared in the About FROs document on the website. So you can see basically exactly what we'll be scoring against.
Great. What is your philosophy around solo founders?
I think we're flexible.
Yeah, it's fine. Just apply. Co-founders are helpful, and generally we find, especially if there's a scientist, having a non-technical person that handles the non-technical side of things in the eventual organization, but they don't have to be a founder. That's more of like, you need to build an organization, not just run a lab.
It's very helpful in practice.
Yes, it's very helpful in practice, exactly. There are some questions around if I'm trying to find non-specific ones. If your founding team is someone from outside the UK, how do visas and things work? Is there support for that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so I think at the FRO stage, right, you'll be setting up your own independent entity. I think you can do visa sponsorships, and that, like, as the leader of your own company, essentially. During the residency, since it can be done remotely, and we're looking to start fairly quickly, I'm not sure how much visa support we can provide. We are actually looking into that with some consultants, but because of the fast turnaround, we'll probably be fairly limited for the 6-month residency at least.
Yeah. Okay, let's see, any other questions? Can a FRO be a subsidiary of a for-profit organization?
I think that it is possible, but it would have to be fairly clear how, that FRO can do independent decision making, what, right, like the full-time team looks like that's dedicated to the project. I think it probably makes it much more complicated. But I don't think that we're excluding
Yeah.
proposals.
I would say, there's some questions about if you have an existing for-profit entity and so on. And I think that we're open to seeing those applications. I think there's some special considerations, right, related to the Venn diagram, at the beginning of how do we really isolate the FRO's incentives and make sure that it can hit the FRO milestones as opposed to like the main company, business priorities and so on. So there's some special considerations. But the fact that you have some kind of existing entity or even existing team, I don't think should exclude you from applying. And if it really makes sense, we can talk about it in some way. So
Can you work with a full-time tenured academic who's not full-time, I guess, at the FRO is my guess.
you can collaborate with anyone. You can even take some of the FRO money and potentially subgrant it, out. But again, the question is, what fraction, how much of it did you really need the FRO in the first place? You have to really need the FRO. But yes, they can have advisors, collaborators, subcontracts, partnership collaboration agreements and so on with university labs, professors, other nonprofits, for-profits, etc. And that's that can be great if it all lines up.
Yeah. But I think one of the features of the FRO model is that you're bringing together this independent, like very focused team where you're hiring, if you're developing software or hardware, you're hiring specialized software engineers and, mechanical engineers for what you need. And that's sort of the value versus, right, it being sort of a consortia of researchers that are collaborating with each other from disparate labs.
Cool. There's a question around how specifically the concept papers have to be in the direct ARIA opportunity spaces. What if there's an application that isn't in a specific opportunity space, but it's related to Convergent's larger mission of building public goods?
We're interested in seeing the concept papers. I think that ultimately the projects we are most likely to select will be the ones that could have an impact on, one or more of ARIA's opportunity spaces, but we're interested in, all ideas.
Great. How much has to be in the UK? So, for example, does a founding team member have to be a UK resident or citizen? Do your collaborators have to be in the UK? What portion of this has to be in the UK versus can be elsewhere?
I think the entity has to be a UK entity. I think the intention is that the core team is operating in the UK. I think it's totally fine to have international employees and collaborators. But for example, you couldn't I don't think it would work to have like just a shell UK company where all of the activities are done elsewhere.
Yeah.
But not, there's not a
Maybe,
requirement that everyone is a UK resident.
yeah, maybe we could say something like a significant majority of people and work in some sense end up in the UK. Many of our US FROs have international employees. There are select founding team members of FROs that are doing it remotely from international primarily remotely from international. But there's a kind of critical mass of it all and the entity itself and the leadership in the UK.
There are some good questions around what happens after the FRO. So the first one is how transition works, especially with the constraint of, oh, there has to be some public impact. Is the idea that, okay, you can be for profit, but you need to mediate that always with some kind of openness and, impact thesis? Is that the idea?
One way to say it is that, if you were always going to be a for-profit all along, and all of what you want to do can be accomplished with a for-profit vehicle and for-profit investment, then it's not a FRO. So if there's no public goods element, it's unlikely. There's a question about timescales, right? So you can talk about what's a very, very long timescale company. And there's some gray areas, but even there, we're looking for some public goods or kind of broad enablement of science and research elements, but that by no means means that the entity itself or spin-offs can't go and become successful traditional companies. But the things that you're developing in the FRO should be so broadly catalytic that it actually makes sense for there to be a public goods component of what you're delivering. Yeah.
Great. And then Paul had a great question around what the exit paths for FRO founders are once the FRO 5-year piece is over. It's very risky for startup founders, but there's a very high reward. So like, how does that translate to the FRO founder model specifically?
I think we're looking for projects and technologies that will not necessarily have a huge financial reward, but will have some sort of major, if we call it impact inflection point or scale inflection point, that if you're successful in the FRO, it can bring you to. So it might involve creating a longer lived nonprofit. You might be convincing the world that the technology that you're making is possible and you wouldn't be able to get that funded otherwise. But once you can show that you can do this capability, then other existing institutes or governments or so on want to actually invest in a nonprofit sense in what you're doing. And then the FRO continues. It could be that once you've kind of done the basic work and released some of these public goods, that you do create a traditional company that then gets its own VC or other type of investment, or becomes some other kind of business. It could be that you have some other transition plan for what happens after, but we want you to be thinking about that from early on, so that it's not, oh, I just did this and then, hey, what happens is I did this and therefore I can do this next thing, which is going to take it to a next level of impact.
Yeah, I would jump in here too. I do like the analogy, if you think of a founder as, or a startup as a revenue engine, right? A FRO is an impact engine. And so if as a FRO founder, you become very proficient at building impact engines, great, that's an important skill set we're trying to train. You can keep doing that repeatedly over time, and your reward is going to be like massive impact, right? The ideal case for a FRO is you unlock an entirely new field of research, right? And so it's, I would say it's analogous in that sense if you replace revenue or money with impact and public goods. And then, what is the evaluation metric to receive funding after the residency?
That's a good question. I think it basically builds on the evaluation criteria that we're sort of doing a preliminary analysis of, during the application process. So I think the criteria won't actually change that much. We'll just be looking for a much more detailed and well thought out, technical and operational plan for how you would actually set up and launch your FRO if you were to be funded. But the principles remain the same.
And can you high level, like what is the process? So you and Adam talk about it, you talk to experts. Is there any information there?
Yeah, I think, right, we'll still be looking for ideas where it's, I think really clear what the impact could be, right? That it could have this sort of catalytic or transformational effect on the field that it's in, that it really, requires this FRO model to execute on. I think during the residency, as the participants, right, like go through all of the trainings, I think we'll be essentially looking at, right, like what is the likelihood of success for funding the project. I think, yeah, we'll be evaluating on impact and I think our level of confidence in the ability to execute.
Cool. Where is this funding coming from?
Coming from our partnership with ARIA.
Great. Thanks, Aria. All right. Any final questions? Let's see. Is the for-profit model compatible with attracting additional philanthropic funding from the US or UK? I don't know if this is specific to the FRO. I guess maybe a broader question is like, what are funding sources of the FRO beyond just the ARIA initial grant, if selected?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends. I mean, I think there's some possibility that Convergent may be able to kind of plus up some of the Convergent, the Frost UK program kind of overall size beyond ARIA's initial commitments to it. So there may be possibilities of philanthropic funds flowing also through Convergent, although we're not promising that in any way. And it really does depend on I mean, I think this question of, is it compatible? I mean, that's sort of a design question. You could have a linked nonprofit philanthropists can sometimes make program related investments or mission related investments. Depending on the type of philanthropy, they can sometimes issue contracts rather than grants. There are depending on the specific philanthropist and specific foundation and what you're trying to do, and it's a pretty nuanced question. But yeah, we do envision that these things can combine potentially if it makes sense for them to could attract other capital. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Any other questions here? I'm trying to look. I think we've covered mostly everything. I don't know, Adam and Mary, if you think we missed anything. We have 5 minutes left.
Yeah, I mean, I see some questions about the VC model, and I think what I would emphasize is like in many ways, going for a VC model, if your thing is VC backable, like in 2025, is a much easier path. There are thousands of VCs. The incentives are very well aligned. It's a well-oiled machine, really, to go after VC funding if you're truly VC backable, even if you have a low chance of success. But if you're going to capture if you have a 5% chance of becoming Airbnb, VCs will invest in you. And so if you can go after a VC path, I think that's what I mean. You should do that. But the entity structure of a FRO could be either a for-profit or a nonprofit, and the transition plan of a FRO could involve for-profit aspects.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some cases to consider, right, where a technology could be VC backable if you were to really narrow down on, right, like a business case that's immediately profitable, but maybe you can make a really strong case that, right, with non-dilutive catalytic funding, you could develop a tool that's more broadly applicable and make it available to the research community, and it would have a much bigger impact than if you were to just develop it for this one, for-profit use case that's venture backable. But yeah, I think, right, Adam sort of outlined the main principles or framing for how we would think about it. Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. If you have any additional questions, you can email frost@convergentresearch.org. We're really looking forward to seeing concept papers and ideas on February 7th. and if not, full proposals by March 28th. And just to say, we're just one of ARIA's activation partners. There are 9 of us developing all kinds of different programs, providing entrepreneurial training, building communities within the UK. Definitely check, keep an eye out for updates from our fellow activation partners. They're organizing some really exciting activities as well. And yeah, we're really excited about this. And thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Goodbye.